Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei was the hidden dragon leader? Part 3. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. As a magic circle appeared in the middle of the occult research club's clubroom, everyone inside anticipated the return of one Issei Hyoudou and his childhood friend. The revelation that their opponent was a fallen angel cadre instead of just a crazy scientist and a lunatic priest rocked the group, and it was time to see what the strongest person among the small group had to say. "Hello everyone," Issei said calmly as the circle faded. He was clearly annoyed still, but not as before. "Hello Issei. I assume you've heard the news from your childhood friend," Rias replied, her own calm hidden among a mask of pure annoyance. "Yes, I have. Irina and I had a very nice discussion on the subject." Issei smiled, causing his childhood friend to blush heavily. Rias ignored Irina's blush and decided to take things from there. "I see, and what are your thoughts on the matter?" Rias asked, calmly, curious what Issei was thinking. A cadre was different from the likes of demented priest like Freed, so this would be a much more difficult battle. Issei paused for a moment to consider everything before getting a sour expression on his face. "Duplicity," Issei replied, choosing an odd phrase to the group. Rias replied in confusion. "Who is Kokabiel?" Issei said dryly. Kokabiel is one of the fallen angel cadre or leaders of the Grigori. His power is legendary, and outside of the Mayu, very few high-class devils could consider themselves his equal. Rias replied calmly. "Exactly," Issei replied, hoping Rias figured something out. "That to the point, Issei. If you're here to emphasize how much I screwed up, I get it." Irina interrupted. Issei rolled his eyes slightly but continued his thought process. "My point, Irina, is that there's absolutely no reason for Kokabiel to steal the swords." Issei shrugged, causing everyone's eyes to widen. "What are you getting at, Issei?" Rias said with another hint of annoyance. Issei couldn't help but groan since Rias was clearly missing the obvious. Why would Kokabiel, one of the strongest fallen angels in the world, steal holy swords in the first place? Obviously, because it would weaken the church. Rias replied, causing Issei to twitch heavily. "I'll see you later, Rias." Issei replied angrily before leaving via magic circle. The fact that Rias couldn't see what was going on absolutely horrified Issei, and he simply needed to get away from the girls for a little bit. "Well, that was odd," Carloman said curiously. Clearly Issei figured something out, but his reaction to Rias' response was not what one would expect. "Let's all go home for the day. Issei's probably just frustrated like all of us." Rias replied, realizing they wouldn't get anywhere without him. "Have a good night, Lady Gremory." Irina bowed before she and Zenovia left to return home. Dinner went by pretty quickly that night, and even though Issei's mother wanted details, nobody was willing to provide them. As he relaxed in his room alone, Issei was utterly furious that Rias hadn't figured out what he was getting at. "I never imagined Rias was that stupid. This is ridiculous," Issei scoffed. It was obvious to him that Kokabiel had a far more sinister plan in mind, but how could Rias dismiss such an idea so easily? "Are you really so surprised, partner? The Gremory girl has relied on her looks and her brother to get by, and we both know it," Drake reminded him. "True, but to be so sloppy is embarrassing. I'm positive if Sona was the one Irina and Zenovia were dealing with, she'd realize the issue and at least draw a theory or two." Issei frowned once again, lamenting the lack of intelligence from the Gremory heiress. Kokabiel didn't care one iota about the blades, but he was clearly using this Valper person in order to drag the three factions into something. "Yes, but if your theory is right, what is he really after?" Drake replied. Issei was about to respond when somebody knocked on his door. "Issei, may I come in?" Irina Hyoudou said nervously. "Sure, why not?" Issei replied, trying to calm down. Irina was his childhood friend and he cared deeply for her, but he couldn't excuse how stupid she was being in all of this. Sure, he understood why she hid the truth from him, but much like with Rias, he considered it to just be base stupidity. As the door opened, Issei was pleasantly surprised by the long-sleeved pajamas that Irina was wearing. They were light blue with frills on the edges, which was a very cutesy appearance for the tomboy, and the fact Irina clearly wasn't wearing a bra was a wonderful sight, even if her breasts were hidden by the pajamas. "Still up for that cuddle you mentioned the other day?" Irina said nervously, hoping that she hadn't lost her childhood friend due to her earlier actions. Issei paused for a moment before a warm smile formed on his face. "Get over here, dummy," Issei instructed, and before long the childhood friends were underneath Issei's covers and Issei holding Irina against his body with his right arm. The two stayed in silence for a while, with Irina simply satisfied with the comfort that was her childhood friend's warmth and glad that Issei forgave her. However, even she had to admit that she was curious what Issei was talking about. "You mentioned duplicity when Rias asked you about Kokabiel. What did you mean by that?" Irina questioned. "You're ruining a wonderful moment, Issei replied with a hint of annoyance. Irina realized that Issei didn't really want to discuss it, so used the only tactic she could at this point. Turning her body slightly, Irina planted a quick kiss on Issei's cheek before saying, "I know Issei, but we have to deal with Kokabiel, and any insight you have will help us." Issei grumbled knowing that Irina was manipulating him yet again. Kokabiel is a fallen angel cadre, which means that he has far more power at his disposal compared to anybody here. Hell, he's stronger than everyone here combined, including me at my full power. Why in the world would he need to steal the Excalibur fragments? Plus, there's another very important question that needs to be answered. Why would Kokabiel, after somehow managing to steal 3 Excalibur at once without anybody figuring it out, go to a place that is not 1 but 2 heiresses living in it? That's horribly sloppy for somebody like Kokabiel, and it makes no logical sense. Issei finished, and Irina's expression soured. "I hate you so much, Issei." Irina pouted. Issei was right to be annoyed at Rias, since there was clearly a lot more to Kokabiel's plan than simply stealing the swords. "You brought it up, Irie. Now how about we get some sleep?" Issei smiled, aware that there wasn't much else to be done. "Fine, you jerk." Irina pouted before leaning into Issei as she closed her eyes for a little bit, enjoying the moment between her and her childhood friend. As the sun shone on a new day, fortunately for Issei, or unfortunately depending on who you talk to, he wasn't the only one who had the idea, and when Issei opened the door, he received an eyeful in the form of a very naked Zenovia Kuoh, Red Dragon Emperor. Zenovia exclaimed, not expecting this at all. With her towel off, Issei had a full view of her incredible body, large breasts, and even the blue hair covering her pussy. She was truly a beauty in her own right, and Issei loved it. All things considered, he had 2 options in this beautiful situation. The first was to close the door and pretend he hadn't seen the girl naked, or press his luck and see if he could seduce the brunette. Naturally, he chose the second since leaving would require him to return to his room, and he doubted he'd ever leave if Irina had her way. "Good morning, Zenovia." Issei smiled, walking into the bathroom without any hesitation. "What are you doing?" Zenovia gasped as Issei walked towards the brunette with a smile on his face. Zenovia knew if she looked down she would see just how big the young man was, and she would likely be unable to resist him after what happened in his room. "I'm going to take a shower. Care to join me?" Issei smiled, placing his towel on the rack right next to hers. "Well, what about Irina?" Zenovia questioned, still stunned by the suggestion of blush forming on her face. "You weren't thinking about Irina when you snuck into my room a few nights ago." Issei smiled, deciding to play that card before getting into the shower and turning the shower on. Zenovia was completely shocked that Issei was aware of her sneaking into his bed, but it only made her more curious on what would happen if she joined them. She knew that Issei was at the very least sleeping with the 2 knights of Rias Gremory and a bunch of schoolgirls, so he wasn't bound to one person. There was also the very real possibility that she could die on this mission, and the idea of dying without experiencing intercourse at least once was not something she wanted to do. The decision made, Zenovia entered the shower, but faced away from Issei, since that was the easiest way to do things. Now what, Zenovia wondered. Zenovia got her answer when Issei pulled her body into his, causing the young woman to flinch as she felt his rock-hard member against her rear. He was massive and her body shivered at the thought of him putting that beast inside her. "Now we shower." Issei smiled. As the water cascaded down the pair, Issei grabbed the soap he was using and lathered it up in before placing his hands on her sides. Zenovia moaned happily, enjoying the feeling of his hands against her body, and the soap made her feel an odd mix of clean and dirty at the same time. "It feels nice, doesn't it? Tell me, was the other night the first time somebody's ever felt you up?" Issei smiled as moved his hands towards her stomach and teased her more. "Yes, you were the first." Zenovia replied with yet another moan. "Really?" Issei smiled as he stopped his teasing in order to lather up again. "Yes, I wanted to give myself to somebody strong. None of the men at the church were strong enough for me." Zenovia moaned as Issei continued to tease her upper body, but oddly enough avoiding her breasts for the moment. "I see." Issei smiled and finally decided to up the ante, taking a hold of Zenovia's pillowy breasts. Zenovia moaned as Issei teased her breasts with his hands. Zenovia wondered how long it would take for Issei to take the teasing to the next level. "How does this compare to a night ago?" Issei smiled, referring to when Zenovia snuck into his room and he fondled her. "This is much better. This time I know you're focused on me." Zenovia replied, her face incredibly flushed from the sensations and the knowledge that it was her he was focusing on now. Issei smiled happily as he decided to forego the soap and simply indulge in Zenovia's body, directly licking her neck as his left hand continued to toy with Zenovia's breasts. As for his right hand, it slid down Zenovia's body and was about to reach for her pussy when they were interrupted. "Issei, hurry up and finish your shower. You've got to get to class." Irina yelled from outside. "Damn it, Irina." Zenovia thought to herself as Issei's ministration stopped. "Got it, Irina. I'll be out in a few minutes." Issei smiled bitterly before pressing himself against Zenovia one more time, allowing her to acknowledge his massive bulge once more. "I'm sorry that we have to end it like this, but don't worry, Zenovia. I'll claim you before too long." Issei whispered, kissing her on the cheek as he nudged her away from his body. I understand, Zenovia replied with a hint of annoyance as she moved to the side so Issei could properly wash himself. A morning that began with an awkward meeting was ending with Issei charming yet another bladed beauty. Another day went by and Issei found himself with the orc. Hello everyone, how are you? Issei said calmly as he arrived in the clubroom. He couldn't help but notice an interesting tension between the two church girls and he wondered if it had to do with the shower. We're fine, Issei. I take it the Kendo club has a day off. Rias wondered since Issei's arrival was far quicker than usual. Yes, they do, which allows us to focus on the matter at hand and the critical change we need to make to our situation. Issei replied, causing everyone to turn towards him. Critical change? Irina said with a raised eyebrow. Yes, Irina, and I hate to say it, but that change involves you and Zenovia. Issei said solemnly, knowing Irina and Zenovia wouldn't like it. What are you suggesting, Issei? Irina said with a raised eyebrow. She didn't like the look on Issei's face and she had a bad feeling in the back of her neck. That you and Zenovia stay at my house for the remainder of the time and leave Kokabiel to us. Issei said bluntly. The more he thought about it, there was only one reason that Kokabiel would act the way he did, and it involved the church girls. You can't be serious, Issei. Irina yelled out in utter fury. The idea that he wanted her to stay back was ridiculous. I'm 100% serious, Irina. In this situation, the number one thing that we don't want to do is give Kokabiel access to the other Excalibur. The easiest way to do that is to leave you guys at home. Issei lied. The Excalibur wasn't Kokabiel's goal, but he needed something to convince Irina to stand down. Sadly, that failed. You must be joking, Issei. You of all people should realize how powerful I am. Irina replied angrily, catching Rias off guard. What's that supposed to mean? Rias wondered in curiosity. My father taught Issei and I about the supernatural when we were kids, and I trained with Issei for a long time before I was able to officially join the church. Irina explained, which told the group all they needed to. Irina had been training for close to 10 years with a blade. Her strength was obvious. Yes, and while that may work against Fried, it will not work against Kokabiel. This is a man who survived a great war. Issei replied swiftly and without hesitation. Irina was furious because he was right, but there was more to it than that. What are you hiding, Issei? Your only words to Rias were duplicity, which means that you believe that whatever Kokabiel is up to involves something more than just the Excalibur or killing Rias and Sona. What's that supposed to mean? Yumi said angrily, since nobody ever suggested Rias was in danger. Irina twitched heavily since this should have been obvious, but a smiling Issei walked over to the angered blonde and wrapped his arm around her waist, calming her down. Kokabiel is so powerful that he could destroy this entire town with all of us in it as easy as breathing. There is absolutely zero reason for him to want to obtain the Holy Sword Excalibur. Valper perhaps, since he was behind the Holy Sword project, but not Kokabiel. Rias shuddered because it was true in a backwards way. So if that's true, what is he after? I can't say, Issei replied calmly, since it would just make things more tedious. An annoyed Irina quickly moved out of his guard and turned towards her childhood friend with spite in her eyes. Can't or won't? Maybe it's time I remind you just how strong I really am, Issei, and you'll stop hiding things. Irina said sternly. Is that a challenge I hear, Irina? Issei said gleefully, a vicious smile forming on his face. Her statement was very hypocritical, but the thought of a challenge made Issei ignore that for the moment. Yes, Issei, yes it is. Irina replied with a smile of her own. Immediately the tension in the room grew since it was clear something important was happening. What's going on? Rias said in confusion. Something about 6 years in the making. Issei smiled heavily as he left the room with Irina and Zenovia not far behind. I don't know about you guys, but I've got to see this. Carloman smiled as she moved to follow. Me too, Yumi said with a surprising amount of hastiness. The way Issei was reacting was as though something major was about to happen between the two, and that bothered her far more than she wanted to admit. Ifufufufu, now you've got me curious. Akeno smiled, following suit. Rias could only helplessly follow with Asia and Kaneko close behind. Something was very odd about all this, but she needed answers. Irina and Issei stood around 10 feet from one another with a serious look on their faces. Rias, do you mind making a barrier around the area? Issei requested. Issei was about to use a ton of power, and the barrier was the only way that the school wouldn't be in danger. Sure, Rias replied, casting said privacy barrier. For Issei to request a privacy barrier meant he wasn't going to hold back. Alright Issei, you know the rules. It's just you and me, no holding back. If you win, well you already know that, but if I win, you tell me what you're hiding. Irina growled angrily. Fine by me, Irina. Rias, if you don't mind, can you start us off? Issei smiled. Rias regained her composure and focused on the two before raising a hand. Battle begin, Rias announced, but the two stood firm. Balance breaker, Issei roared instantly, and the watching group looked on as Issei appeared in his legendary armor. How long ago did you get that? Irina couldn't help but wonder. Issei removed his helmet and stared at his childhood friend with a wry smile. I got it last year. Training for the day I got to claim you got me through most of middle school, but during my third year I stopped because I began to wonder if I'd see you again. That all changed when I arrived at Kuoh and found someone who reignited my spark. Issei smiled at the memory. Irina was initially surprised by that since as far as she knew the relationship between the Grimoire and Issei had only recently begun. Then she remembered Issei's other activity and frowned, it was one of the girls in that Kendo club. That's right. Murayama brought all of that back, and that hunger to conquer her like I once planned to conquer you allowed me to reach balance breaker. Issei shrugged. I see, Irina said calmly as a magic circle formed on her hands. She was glad that Issei got stronger for her since she did the same and she wasn't going to hold back. So she's actually using it. Zenovia said with intrigue. Using what Rias couldn't help but wonder. Irina and I both have secondary swords which we were supposed to use in emergencies only, mine is Durandal, while Irina has Hautaclear. The fact she's willing to use it against her childhood friend means that this is going to be an interesting battle. Zenovia explained. Rias filed that information away for later but wondered what would happen next. Sure enough, the legendary Hautaclear revealed itself. It was a simple steel sword around 40 centimeters in length with a golden hilt that had a small crystal in the middle. I'm honored that you'd use your real blade against me, Irina, but that doesn't mean you'll be able to win. After all, I knocked out Zenovia in one punch. Issei smiled. Yes, I know, but you also caught her off guard. Then again, Irina smiled as she vanished in an impressive show of speed before appearing behind Issei. I'm also not Zenovia. Irina smiled, aiming a slash at Issei's head that he easily ducked under before spinning in order to elbow her in the stomach. An attempt that quickly failed as Irina used her impressive speed to move again. Very nice, Issei chuckled, unbothered by how easily his attack failed. Thank you, but we're just getting started. Irina smiled before attacking again. The watching group was stunned as Irina continued to stay on the attack while Issei simply blocked the strikes with his gauntlet. You finally made your move, huh? Irina, Zenovia thought to herself as she watched the pair exchange blows. After Issei left the house, Irina confronted Zenovia about her shared shower with Issei, and the pair proceeded to get into a massive argument about Zenovia's intentions for Issei. The argument was interrupted by Issei's mother, who chastised Irina for being jealous, reminding Irina that the only thing stopping her from joining Issei's fellow lovers is that deal they made as kids. Irina couldn't say anything else since she was right. If she truly wanted to, she and Issei could have had sex the night before, and that would be it. Stop playing around, Issei. Irina yelled out angrily, stopping Zenovia's musings. Who said I'm playing here, Irie? You're really fast and I'm having some trouble keeping up. Issei chuckled as he continued to parry Irina's attacks. We both know you're toying with me. Why aren't you taking this seriously? Irina growled, stopping her assault on her childhood friend to catch her breath. Because this battle is unnecessary and we both know it. Issei smiled. What's that supposed to mean? Irina replied angrily. It's very simple, Issei smiled before vanishing in an incredible show of speed and appearing behind Irina. I conquered you years ago, Irina. Issei smiled, wrapping his arms around Irina's waist. Stop playing around, Irina said angrily, trying to keep the professionalism she had shown throughout the mission, but watching it slowly fade due to Issei's aura washing over her body. From the moment you called me and asked to stay with me during this mission, you've wanted to submit to me. You just couldn't convince yourself to do it without keeping our promise. Issei whispered smoothly. Stop it, Issei, Irina protested, but the fact she didn't take the opportunity to attack was proof that Issei was right. Then resist me, Irina. Use that strength you've gained over the years to push me away. Show me that you haven't submitted to me just yet, Issei said firmly, almost daring Irina to fight back. Issei, I'm serious, Irina replied, trying to keep her professional veneer, but she knew it was pointless. From the moment they kissed in his room a few days ago, Irina Hyoudou was hooked on Issei once again. That feeling only escalated when she learned of his relationships with Yumi and the girls of the Kendo club. Hell, a part of her was hoping that Issei actually escalated things when he punished her the other day. When he didn't and she realized Issei and Zenovia shared a shower, she decided there and then that the day would end with naked in Issei's bed. Yes, and so am I, Issei smiled as his right hand moved up in order to escalate things more and without resistance. At least that was his plan until a clone walked into the barrier and walked over to Issei. What's going on? Rias asked in confusion. Issei pulled away from Irina and dispelled his balance breaker. Trouble, Issei frowned. What happened? Rias wondered. Issei turned towards Rias with a look of annoyance. I sent my clone to search for Freed, and while he was searching he felt a flare of power. The source of the power was one that was extremely powerful, and that only means one thing. Kokabiel, Rias said coldly. I found him and he's waiting for us right now. Issei said calmly. Then let's go, Rias insisted, and everyone's focus changed from the odd battle between childhood friends to the cadre who set everything up. Issei led them to an abandoned amphitheater where a smiling Freed was waiting for them. You devil scum, and I see we have some church girls too. Fried cackled in amusement. Enough games, Fried. Where's your boss? Rias said angrily. Oh, come on, Red. No, hello. No, nice to see you. You suck as a host. Fried taunted. She can't help it if you're a terrible guest. You make that show of attacking Yumi and then hide like a coward. Issei chuckled. Little bastard. Don't make me come over there and gut you like a fish. I don't know why Big Red over here and the church girls brought you along, but I don't mind getting rid of you. Fried growled. I'm afraid that would end very badly for you, Fried. A new presence said in a gruff voice as they walked into the clearing. Upon seeing the new person, everyone in the group tensed up, including Issei. The new presence had long black hair with pointy ears and dark red eyes and was wearing a long black robe with purple trim, a high collar and gold armor on his shoulders. Hey boss. I was wondering where you went. Fried smiled. Kokabiel, at last you show yourself. Rias said angrily. Kokabiel ignored Ria's words and focused on Issei instead. Fried, the young man before you is the Red Dragon Emperor. He could kill you and everyone here besides me without batting an eyelash. Kokabiel smiled, stunning Fried and Issei. You're shitting me, boss. Fried said in shock. You flatter me, Lord Kokabiel, but that isn't completely true. Issei replied calmly. Kokabiel stared straight at Issei and smiled. Boy, I've been on the battlefield for thousands of years and seen many types of people. I can tell that you're hiding a massive power behind that innocent smile. Rias wanted to protest, but she knew Kokabiel was right. The power he showed against Riser was incredible, and from the way Issei fought you could tell he only scratched the surface. Maybe so, but you didn't flare your power just to tell me how strong I was. You clearly have a message for Rias here, and Fried was such a terrible deliveryman that you decided to do it yourself. Issei chuckled, breaking Rias from her humor. Watch it, Fried said angrily. How you're correct about that. Kokabiel smiled before turning to Rias. In 2 days I'll be coming over to that wonderful base of yours and taking over. I'll be joined by my dear partner Valper and Fried here, and I'll be activating my plan. If you wish to stop me, go ahead and try. Why you? Rias growled, well aware that she couldn't stop him from doing just that. Kokabiel could kill all of them in a second, but he hadn't done so. She was better off enjoying his whims and going from there. See you then, Kokabiel smiled, simply turning and walking away. Later, losers, Fried cackled before turning away. Issei sat in his room after the crazy afternoon wondering what would happen next. After Fried left, Rias sent everyone home so they could relax, and the plan was initially to discuss strategy the very next day. Unfortunately, Issei couldn't attend due to the fact the Kendo club had a match, and as their manager Issei was obligated to attend, much to Ria's annoyance, but even more so to Irina's, because he was putting the Kendo club over her mission. So Drake, are you ready to face Kokabiel? Issei smiled as he sat in his room. Yes. I look forward to seeing your full power at work. Drake smiled. And I can't wait either. This will be a battle to look forward to. Issei smiled. So what are you going to do about your childhood friend? Drake wondered. Absolutely nothing. It's all up to Irina. Issei smiled as he relaxed in his room. Irina POV. So Irina, what would you do? Zenovia wondered as we sat in the guest room in Issei's house. Issei's words during our fight were accurate, and honestly, if not for the interruption, there was a good chance I might have had sex with him there and then. I don't know, I replied. I wanted to say, I really did, but I felt like I was obligated to fight him for it. Well, you have a minute to decide, Irina, because I very much want Issei to sleep with me, and if you don't go, I will. Zenovia said angrily. I couldn't blame her for being angry since I did interrupt their shower out of jealousy, and they were almost certainly going to have sex if I didn't interrupt. After all, Zenovia doesn't have the restriction that I do on Issei's affections. Fine, I replied, realizing that Zenovia was right. I had a childhood friend to fuck. Good. I'll get my chance before this is all over, but tonight should be all about you. Zenovia smiled. You're a terrible partner. I chuckled, realizing that she was pushing me towards Issei. Just get going, Irina, before I change my mind. Zenovia smiled back as I left the room. As I walked towards Issei's room, I was both nervous and excited. The time had finally arrived for me to take my place at Issei's side, and as I opened the door to Issei's room, a part of me was afraid he wouldn't be there. Luckily for me, Issei was there, and the minute I walked in, he looked towards me with his warm eyes. So are we cuddling again, Irina? Issei said warmly. No. We're doing a lot more. You were right, Issei, and you conquered me years ago. Now it's time to claim your prize, I replied as I walked towards his bed. I see, Issei smiled, getting up and walking towards me. It was time at last. All my training had been for this moment, and with the battle with Kokabiel a few days away, it was something we both needed. Lemon start. Issei and Irina met in the middle of his room, and the two childhood friends wrapped their arms around each other before engaging in yet another makeout session. True, they had kissed many times as kids and even a few days ago when they reunited, but this one was different. Typically, Issei and Irina would fight for dominance, and although Issei usually won, Irina put up a good fight. As their tongues clashed this time, there wasn't a sense of dominance in the kiss, but of desire. That all the feelings they held onto for the years they were apart were all exploding in one moment. The kiss lasted for an incredible 2 minutes before Irina finally pulled away to get some air and swallow the drool that was starting to form in her mouth from the intense kiss. "That was amazing," Irina said in a complete haze from the overpowering kiss. "Yes, it was, but we're just getting started." Issei smiled as he grabbed Irina again and pulled her towards the bed, switching their positions, so Irina was just in front of the bed. A smiling Issei pulled away as he pulled off his white shirt, revealing his naked upper body. "I see," Irina said with a slight blush, knowing what was expected of her next. While Issei divested himself of his pants, Irina slid off her pajamas, revealing a set of simple pink underwear. "And here I was expecting white and now boxer-clad," Issei teased. Irina's affection for him was well known, but so was her passion for the church. Irina smiled before falling onto the bed with her eyes fixed on Issei's frame and the massive bulge that was going to pierce her soon enough. "I figured I'd do a combination of red for you and white because of my love of the church," Irina revealed with a sultry smile. "I see," Issei replied with a smile of his own, well aware that Irina was further giving into her feelings for him by saying that. "Enough focusing on my choice of underwear, Issei, focus on what's underneath it," Irina pouted slightly. Considering his supernatural harem, there was no telling when she'd be interrupted or by who. Right, Issei said with a smile as he crawled onto the bed towering over his childhood friend. His instincts were telling him to simply dive in and devour Irina's pussy, but that would be too easy. A smiling Issei leaned down and kissed Irina's left cheek before he began trailing butterfly kisses all over her body. "Issei, stop teasing me," Irina moaned as Issei kissed down her arm. "This is not teasing, Irina. This is marking. I want everyone to know that you are mine and mine alone." Issei smiled as his kissing reached the end of her arm at last. "Then let me make it easier for you to fully mark me." Irina smiled as she leaned up slightly in order to divest herself of the pink bra instead of having Issei tear it apart. With the bra gone, Irina's pink nipples were exposed at last, and thanks to the earlier kiss, they were rock hard. "Oh, you didn't need to do that just yet." Issei smirked as he kissed across her collarbone, but instead of going for her large breasts, he went for her stomach instead. Why, Irina moaned with pleasure, his kisses stirring her up even more than she already was. "Because I've got something special planned for your breasts," Issei growled as he continued to kiss down her stomach and smiled briefly as he smelled the arousal coming from her panties and saw the stains as they were beginning to form. A brief look towards his childhood friend's eyes revealed that she was aware of how bad it was, but as Issei trailed up her body again, Irina's breasts were left waiting. Irina had enough, and considering Issei's personality, she had a good idea of what Issei would do. "That's enough, Issei," Irina said angrily as she shocked Issei by grabbing her and somehow flipping their bodies, so Irina was on top. "Where was this during our fight?" Issei smirked. "Shut up, you jerk. The fight was just an excuse for us to get here. You could have just knocked me out with one punch, but no. You had to draw it out just to tease me and taunt me." Irina pouted. "True, but we still got here, didn't we?" Issei chuckled, but his chuckling was short-lived when Irina moved in front of Issei and pulled of his boxers, revealing his rock-hard member. "Now it's my turn, Issei. It's time for me to mark you," Irina said with a firm determination. With a surprising lack of hesitation, Irina kissed the tip of his dick before enveloping it with her warm mouth. "Not bad, Irina," Issei said with a smile. He doubted it would do her much good since Irina was an amateur and Murayama and Caddis blew him every day before practice. What he didn't expect was that in a flash Irina had taken 7 of his 11 inches down her throat before her gag reflex forced her back up. It was almost enough for him to get him to moan, almost. "How's that, Issei?" Irina said, happily aware of how difficult what she accomplished was. For somebody who's supposed to be pure, that was pretty impressive. Issei teased, but Irina was unmoved. The chestnut-haired girl slid her tongue down his pole with no hesitation, moving at a speed that far surpassed the Kendo duo. "I have needs too, Issei." Irina smiled. Those needs may have included using a dildo she brought on a mission a year ago to practice blowjobs, knowing that she'd be reunited with Issei in due time. Of course Issei wasn't going to know that unless Zenovia squealed. "Then show me what you can do, Irina." Issei smiled, curious if his treasure could live up to the hype. As Irina's tongue teased his shaft, Issei was slowly beginning to shudder, a thought that was nearly impossible considering the sheer amount of blowjobs he enjoyed. "I'm shuddering, what's going on?" Issei thought to himself as Irina's tongue moved around his shaft. "That's because she's different, partner. She is your true mate and your body is reacting to that," Drake revealed, well aware of his partner's confusion. "Makes sense," Issei mused as Irina shocked him further by surrounding his prick with her breasts. "What did I do to deserve this?" Issei shuddered as Irina began to give Issei a tit job that rivaled any he had so far. It was scary how good Irina was at this. "You were my childhood friend, Issei," Irina replied happily as she moved her breasts up and down Issei's pole. The sheer heat it was giving off was incredible, and Irina was getting more and more turned on. "Well, as your childhood friend, how about I reward you as well?" Issei suggested, knowing that he had lost his dominance of the situation. Irina clearly prepared for this moment. Irina got off of Issei and, as her childhood friend watched with hunger in his eyes, slid off her panties and revealed her soaked snatch, and before long was back on the bed in a 69. "Come on, Issei. Make me scream," Irina said happily before resuming her work on his shaft, her soaked pussy right in front of Issei's waiting face. "You'll regret that, Irina." Issei smiled viciously as he slid his tongue into her snatch with no hesitation. "NGHH," Irina moaned into his snatch, immediately feeling the effects. "You taste so good, Irie. I'm amazed that nobody snatched you up yet." Issei teased as he dined on Irina's pussy like it was his favorite meal in the world. "I saved myself for you, Issei, NGHH. Many guys asked about me, but I turned them down. Ah. You were always the one I thought about at night. You were always the one I wanted when it was time to lose my virginity. I got this strong so I could stand at your side." Irina moaned as Issei's tongue teased her pussy. She was so turned on that playing with Issei's junk was secondary. Issei was touched by his childhood friend's confession and stopped his ministrations, well aware that she was on the verge of cooming. "Then give it to me, Irina. That virginity you've held for so long, the purity that so many have desired, give it to me now," Issei said happily. The games were over, the foreplay was over, and it was time for Issei and Irina to have sex. No words were required, and Irina got off of Issei's face before straddled his member with her soaked pussy, ready for the monster that had claimed so many others to claim her. Dropping onto Issei's member, the virginity she had been saving for so long was Issei's at last, and the combination of the rough insertion and the sheer desire she felt caused Irina to cry out in pain and pleasure as her first orgasm of the day rushed out of her body. "Ah," Irina cried out with pleasure and pain. Tears flew down her face knowing that she and Issei were together at last. Issei could see the pain his childhood friend's eyes and leaned up in order to wrap his arms around her. "Are you okay, Irie?" Issei asked, nervously wiping off her tears as he held her in his arms. "I'm perfect, Issei, but I wouldn't mind us doing this for a bit longer," Irina replied happily. Sure, Issei smiled as he held the position for a little bit, and only when Irina playfully shoved him did Issei fall back. "I'm gonna make you forget all those girls, Issei," Irina vowed as she began moving up and down Issei's shaft at an impressive speed. "Damn, you feel so good, Irina." Issei grunted happily, enjoying the vice grip Irina had on his shaft. Most of the girls had to be molded into his shape, but Irina was perfect right now. It was as though her body was made to enjoy his dick, and he loved it. "I feel great too, Issei, but I want to feel more," Irina cried out, and Issei obliged, grabbing Irina's hips and thrusting up, causing her breasts to bounce even more. "So good," Issei groaned as his member finally breached Irina's womb, causing another scream to come from Irina's mouth. "Yes," Irina cried out, the pleasure growing even more as Issei's animalistic thrusts continued. Right now she wasn't worried about the battle with Kokabiel. She was only focused on Issei and how amazing he felt inside her. As for Issei, his body just kept going, and he was stunned at how quickly he was reaching his climax. There was something different about this moment, and Issei knew it and loved it. "Irina, I'm about to coom," Issei said happily. "Coom inside me, Issei. Mark my pussy as yours and yours alone," Irina roared out in a voice unbefitting of somebody who had just lost her virginity a mere 10 minutes ago. This is what Issei did to her. This is how Issei made her feel. This is what it meant to have Issei by her side. "Alright, Irina," Issei roared back, knowing that this is what he wanted more than anything. This was the treasure that he had coveted. Right now no other girl mattered to Issei, and he was determined to show it. "I'm cooming," Irina roared as her body allowed yet another release to flow out of her body. "I'm cooming too," Issei yelled out, painting Irina's womb with his seed at last. The orgasm continued for a minute before Issei's member was forced out due to Irina being unable to contain his seed. "Amazing. If you weren't sterile, I'm pretty sure I'd be pregnant right now," Irina chuckled as she pressed her body against Issei's, just wanting a moment to recover. "That was just orgasm number 1. Issei smiled, his member already ready for more. A stunned Irina looked back at the rod that ruined her for other men and realized that it was raring to go. Good grief. Irina smiled as she peeled off of Issei's body and got onto her knees into a position that she knew would make her feel even more. Even though she would be sore in the morning, she knew that it would be worth it in the end because it was born of Issei's love for her. Lemon end. By the time Issei was finally limp, an hour had passed, but it was the longest hour of Irina's life. Countless orgasms from both vaginal and anal intercourse had her body so strained that she could barely move. Then again, she was in the arms of her childhood friend, so she really didn't want to. "Irina, I just wanted to say I love you," Issei said happily as the two cuddled together despite the incredible stench of sex around them. "I love you too, Issei, but next time, take it easy," Irina replied with a smile. "So there will be a next time." "I can't wait," Issei teased as he kissed Irina's head. "Shut up, you dork," Irina chuckled, and the two enjoyed a moment of peace and bliss together, knowing that they were about to enter a fight for their lives. The next day was Friday, and his duties as a student got in the way. Irina was definitely his after their time together, and he had every intention of adding Zenovia to the group before the battle with Kokabiel tomorrow. For now, he was in the Kendo Hall of Kuoh Academy as he watched his girls compete against their rival Nachizuri Preparatory Academy. What the hell is going on? Issei muttered as he sat in his spot as a manger. He couldn't explain why or how, but he was sensing supernatural power in the area that wasn't his own. As much as he had sex with Murayama and Caddis, it was possible they had gained a bit of essence from him, but this was a fairly significant pulse. Match to Kuoh 3-2, the referee announced, breaking Issei from his musing. Caddis just beat her opponent and now it was time for the final match. Murayama was competing this time against a girl from Nachizuri named Genevieve Arcana. Apparently she was Murayama's big rival and she clearly wanted to win if the determination on her face was any indication. She had blonde hair that was parted in the middle of her admittedly large forehead and baby blue eyes. He couldn't tell much else due to the unflattering nature of her kendo outfit, but he wasn't concerned about that for the moment since finding the supernatural source was a bit more important. Match begin, the announcer said firmly, and the battle begun, which was when Issei finally realized the source of the power he had been focused on. No way, Issei said in shock. Genevieve was emitting off a small killing intent that was throwing the normally skilled Murayama off and gave Genevieve the edge early on. Deciding to even the playing field a bit, Issei focusing a fair bit of his own killing intent on the blonde in front of her as Murayama was about to attack. It actually worked, caused Jean to flinch big time, allowing Murayama to strike a point. Just the referee announced. As the match continued, Genevieve struck again, giving her the lead, and Issei followed with his own attempt. It was 2-2 now, and Issei was curious what would happen if he didn't use the killing intent on the young blonde. Admittedly, this time Genevieve didn't use her intent and the pair engaged in a fairly impressive clash. Unfortunately for Murayama, she slipped up and got a strike to the chest, ending the match and giving Genevieve the win. As everyone clapped, Issei focused his killing intent on Genevieve again. She quickly turned towards him before looking away. As Genevieve walked away, Issei filed away the fact she had supernatural powers to the side and focused instead on congratulating Murayama for a job well done. The smiling Issei left the Kendo Hall with a smile on his face due to his managerial duties, which involved giving each girl who won their match a congratulatory creampie, but since Kuoh won 5 of the 7 matches, he was fairly drained by the time he approached the entrance of the school. Well, this is a surprise. Issei smiled. Waiting for him at the entrance of the school was Murayama's opponent from the final match, wearing Nachizuri's traditional white uniform. That must have been some speech if you're just getting back after an hour. Genevieve said haughtily. Yes, it was. However, I doubt you want to discuss how I motivate the girls I manage. Issei replied with a bit of a sneer in his voice. No, I don't. I want to discuss how somebody who can give off a powerful killing intent like yours is still human in a campus filled with devils. Genevieve questioned with a hint of annoyance. Issei was slightly surprised by the lack of concern for her secret, but realized that Genevieve was also smart enough to only speak to him. The answer is quite simple. I'm far too powerful for Rias or Sona to control, and they're aware of that. Issei said confidently. I see. Well, what would you say if I told you that I know a group of powerful individuals who could use a man like you? Genevieve asked with a look of curiosity in her voice. I'd say that your recruiting pitch sucks. Maybe a few less clothes next time, and you might catch my attention, Issei replied with a sarcastic smile, causing the blonde to blush heavily as he walked by. Wait, Genevieve called out with a hint of desperation. She couldn't beat Issei, she was aware of that, and there was no doubt in her mind that if he let her stay with the devils, it would come back to bite her and her organization sooner or later. She had to recruit him now or else. What now? I've had a long day and I could use a nap. Issei groaned in annoyance. She clearly didn't get the message. Realizing that her pitch had clearly failed, Genevieve was going for the more nuclear option. What will it take for you to join me? Issei groaned as he stared back at the girl with his killing intent high enough that she won't be knocked unconscious, but that was it. The only reason you're still speaking right now is because Rias and Sona have far too much on their plate to deal with you. I let you go free this time, Genevieve, but the next time you try to recruit me, you won't like the result. Issei smiled as he left the campus and returned home as a stunned Genevieve could only watch in frozen fear. The smiling Issei sat in his room wondering what tonight would offer him. The battle with Kokabiel was tomorrow, and although Irina appeared to be alright after their night together, something Issei attributed to Carloman likely helping out, he doubted she'd be up for more. There was a chance Carloman and Yumi would come and visit, particularly Carloman, since he hadn't really spent much time with her over the last week. As the door to his room opened, he couldn't help but smile as Zenovia Korda appeared. Not sneaking in this time. Issei snickered. No, I'm not, however I do wish to continue what we started in the shower. Zenovia replied as she walked over to Issei. Normally Issei would be incredibly eager to enjoy the brunette, and if not for Irina's interruption, he probably would have, but something changed. Zenovia, wait a minute. Issei insisted, stopping things in their tracks. What's the matter, am I not attractive enough for you? Zenovia said with a slight pout. Issei frowned a bit before getting up and walking towards the brunette. Cupping her face, a smiling Issei gazed into her eyes and said, that couldn't be further from the truth. You're incredibly attractive and any guy would be lucky to have you. Then why won't you have intercourse with me? If Irina hadn't interrupted us, surely you would have done something the day before, Zenovia protested. Issei frowned slightly since Zenovia was right, because that was heat of the moment, and so is this. Issei replied, causing Zenovia to look away. I don't know what you're talking about. Zenovia said bashfully. Issei smiled as he backed away from Zenovia and stared at her again. What is about me you desire, Zenovia? What is it about me that made you want to give your virginity to me of all people? Issei asked honestly. It was a question that never occurred to him when he seduced the Kendo club, Yumi or Carloman, but this was different. The Kendo club was a bonus born from his desire for Murayama. Yumi was admittedly out of spite and Carloman was revenge. He couldn't explain why he didn't want to claim Zenovia, but right now he didn't. You're strong. My desire was always to have a strong child. Zenovia admitted with a bit of shame. Issei smiled before wrapping his arms around Zenovia and kissing her on the lips. They kissed for 30 seconds before Issei pulled away with disappointment in his eyes. That kiss just now, Zenovia. Did you feel anything from that? Issei wondered. Zenovia had the nerve to look away for a moment before muttering, no, I did not. And that's why I won't sleep with you. However, I would not be opposed to cuddling for a little bit. Issei smiled. Zenovia frowned since Issei was very clearly hiding something. He had no problem fondling her before and she was positive that the only reason they hadn't had sex in the shower was due to Irina's interruption. However, she realized that this was as good as she was going to get. Alright. I suppose that's enough for now. Zenovia replied as Issei led her to the bed. The rest of the night was spent in silence and the brunette wondered what changed from the day before. Surely sleeping with Irina hadn't changed things that much. Around 30 minutes passed before Issei finally spoke up, clearly aware of the unease. The reason I'm not sleeping with you now has nothing to do with Irina or the reasons I mentioned earlier. Then why? Zenovia wondered. The fact he wasn't sleeping with her was strange, since he didn't seem to mind molesting her twice already. Kokabiel could kill Rias anytime he wanted. Hell, he could kill all of us, but he hasn't done so yet. There's only one reason he would do that. What's that? Zenovia said nervously. Issei paused for a minute before stopping. Never mind. I think I'm just overthinking things. Issei replied. But nothing, Zenovia. If we survive this mission I will sleep with you before you return to London, that much I promise you. Issei backtracked. I'll hold you to that. Zenovia replied as they cuddled together on his bed. She knew Issei was hiding something, but also that he wasn't going to reveal his hand so easily. She would worry about what he was hiding until after they beat Kokabiel. Hey girls, how about I cook us one last meal before we head out? Issei suggested as the group relaxed in the house the afternoon before the big battle. Issei was wearing a black tracksuit with white stripes down the arms and legs and a red shirt underneath along with tennis shoes. Irina and Zenovia were dressed in the church's battle uniform with their blades by their sides. I didn't know you cooked. Irina said in shock. Thus far all the meals had been cooked by Issei's mother and the idea that Issei himself would be making the last meal was a shock. Yeah, I do cook once in a while. Since this is a special occasion I figured why not. Issei smiled innocently. I can't wait to see what you'll make us. Irina replied happily. Well, I'll get started now. Issei said calmly as he walked into the kitchen to prepare his meal. What he didn't see was the two church girls exchange a look that suggested something was off. Over in the kitchen Issei smiled as he prepared their meal. Partner, are you sure this is the right thing to do? Drake said nervously into his partner's head. Yes, it is, Drake. I think I know what Kokabiel is planning and if those two come he'll get his real wish. Issei replied mentally. Killing Rias would goat the devils into war, but not the church. Even killing the two girls wouldn't do anything either. That meant Kokabiel knew something that would make the church act and he was going to tell the girls. Issei didn't know what that was, but he had to stop Irina and Zenovia from seeing the truth. Well, let's do it then, Drake replied. Yeah, Issei groaned as he snuck over to the cupboard and grabbed some sleeping pills his mom used on occasion. He hated to do it to Irina, but it was for her own good that he stopped her from showing up. Luckily for him, Irina told her where the group was meeting beforehand so he could keep the deception going. As Issei arrived at the meeting place he thanked his lucky stars that his plan had worked. The dinner was steak and miso soup, but he could tell from the look on her eyes, Irina was suspicious of his actions. Instead of crushing the pills into her soup, a more traditional plan, he actually crushed the pills and put them on the steak along with other seasoning, a plan that proved fruitful when Irina fed him her miso soup almost as a test. No doubt his childhood friend would be furious later, but as far as he was concerned it was a small price to pay to protect them. Where are Irina and Zenovia? Rias questioned as Issei arrived alone. Issei couldn't help but notice that Yumi was in the male uniform this time, but he had the distinct feeling that this would be the last time she ever wore such a thing. They wouldn't be coming. I have them drugged back at my house. Issei said calmly. Rias was absolutely furious that Issei would do such a thing and made her belief known. What are you thinking, Issei? Why would you drug our allies? Rias exclaimed. This was insane and irrational even for him. I have my reasons. Issei replied calmly. And they are. Rias scowled. My concern and mine alone, Issei replied. Rias frowned before she was shocked when Issei walked over to her and kissed her on the lips, something she'd wanted for quite some time. The kiss lasted a few seconds, but Issei pulled away before Rias could intensify it. Just trust me, Rias, Issei smiled. Fine, you jerk, Rias pouted, aware that he only kissed her to calm her down. It worked, but Rias was certainly annoyed with the brown-haired boy. Then let's go, Issei smiled as they approached the battlefield. Hyoudou household. Damn you, Issei. Why would you do that to me? Irina wondered as she sat in the room. She realized Issei was up to something the moment he offered to cook and cast a spell that would neutralize any poison on herself and her partner. She was right to do so because Issei did ultimately drug her and Zenovia. The fact he added a barrier to the mix as well was further proof he was hiding something. So are you going to go? He clearly had his reasons to keep us there. Zenovia said calmly, not taking it as harshly as the other girl. I know that, but I don't want the last memory of my childhood friend to be his smiling face as he drugged me. Irina chuckled bitterly. Just like Issei, Irina suspected Kokabiel's real intention was masked amongst Valper's greed, but there were very few things he could do that would truly shake her. She was stronger than that, and she would show Issei just how powerful she had become. Alright, but we're going to make him pay for that later. Zenovia struggled. Oh yeah, Irina smiled as the pair broke his barrier with ease and made their way towards the battlefield. Kuoh Academy. The moment Issei arrived at Kuoh Academy, it was clear that this was no ordinary battle. All along the outside of the school, the devils from the student council were floating in the sky and working on a powerful barrier. It was a wise move since the power that Kokabiel could put out would cause a whole lot of problems. The president of said council flew to them and she wasn't happy, so Rias cared to tell me where our guests from the church are. Sona Sitri frowned. Admittedly, Issei didn't interact much with the group and that was fine by him. Issei drugged them and left them at his house. Rias replied, instantly throwing Issei under the bus. I see, and does Mr. Hyoudou have a reason for doing so? Sona said with an annoyed glare of her own. I do, but I won't tell you, Ms. Sitri. If you're worried about the devils looking bad, don't, since it was my decision and mine alone. I see. Well, just be careful out there. Kokabiel is extremely strong. If I didn't think she'd make it worse, I'd call my sister the Mau Leviathan. Sona mused. They were going to have a hard time in this battle even with Issei's impressive power. Don't worry, Sona. I've already taken the liberty of calling Surziches for us. A Kendo revealed, much to Ria's shock. The Kendo, why would you do that? Rias exclaimed. Because Issei is independent help, she felt like she had something to prove in this battle, and calling her brother would negate that. Simple, Kokabiel is powerful, and if something should happen to us he'd want to know anyway. Don't worry, because he won't be ready for an hour. A Kendo replied as calmly as possible. Rias was internally furious, but deep down she also knew it was the right move. Well, let's hope we don't need my brother. Rias replied as they walked into the field where Kokabiel was waiting. When they entered the school, it wasn't hard to find Kokabiel because the man was in the air sitting on a throne with a smug look on his face and dressed in his signature robe, and from the look of things he was very close to their clubroom. Quickly moving to his location, they found Fried waiting with a smile on his face next to an older guy with a grey mustache, bald head and glasses that was in white priest robes. Next to that man was a large pillar of light that was no doubt the Excaliburs he possessed being fused. What took you guys so long? I was getting bored. Fried cackled. Now Fried. You don't have a weapon, and if you want to fight them properly you'll need one. The old man lectured. Sorry, boss Valper. I'm just so eager to kill that smug bastard. Fried smirked, pointing at an amused Issei. Issei couldn't help but roll his eyes at the suggestion that he would lose to Fried, but he focused more on Valper. This was no doubt a terrible idea, but there was something he simply had to know for his own curiosity. Hey Valper, care to answer a question for me since we're waiting? Issei asked calmly, much to the confusion of everybody watching. Why, of course. Valper said smugly. What made a simple bishop like you want to come up with such a unique idea? Issei questioned without praising the man. As much as he hated to admit it, Valper's plan would have been incredibly beneficial to the church, but something went wrong. Valper's face lit up in a way that disturbed Issei quite a bit before replying. As a child, I was obsessed with Excalibur. I desired to have the power of King Arthur for myself, which is why I first wanted to join the church. Unfortunately, when I tested myself I discovered that I wasn't compatible with the legendary blade, Valper admitted. Quite a few faces paled when they realized what Valper was getting at, but one person in particular was furious. You mean to tell me you did all that? You killed all those children, Yumi said in shock. Yes. I killed all those children because I wanted to wield the blade myself. Valper smiled. You bastard. Yumi growled with rage on her face, and just as she was about to charge Valper, Issei grabbed her. Wait a moment, Yumi. Killing him now would be easy, but I have a much better idea. Issei smiled viciously. What? Yumi said with a scowl. If this was anybody else she'd push away, but Issei was different. The smiling Issei moved behind Yumi and wrapped his arms around her stomach before placing his head right next to her right ear. Wait until Valper finishes his grand weapon and gives it to that pervert freed. Once he does, destroy his precious blade and then kill him with the very power he granted you. Issei whispered in a dark expression that caused Yumi to shudder with glee. The dark words were like a siren's song, and Yumi took them in. Will you reward me afterwards? Yumi wondered like an innocent puppy who wanted a treat from her master. But of course. When you've claimed your vengeance and put your past behind you, I'll remind you where your future lies. By day you will be Ria's worthy knight and you will serve her well with your power. However, your body, soul and heart belong to me. Issei whispered in a cold sadistic tone that caused Yumi to shudder and Rias to frown. Yes, master. Yumi smiled with a look of lust that was almost enviable if it weren't for the fact Issei wasn't her master. Good girl, Issei smiled as he kissed her cheek and pulled away. These good freed smirked, appreciating how thoroughly Yumi was seduced. Yes, he as Rias frowned, finding Issei's seduction of Yumi to be quite terrifying. Looking over at Carloman, she saw a similar lustful gaze, no doubt wondering when it will be her turn to experience Issei's skilled touch. A part of Rias wanted Issei for herself, but another part was terrified that Issei would be the master in their relationship. Town of Kuoh, Irina and Zenovia made their way towards the battlefield, and Irina was certainly fuming. Irina, stay focused. Zenovia yelled as they made their way towards Kuoh Academy. She could tell that her partner was seriously frustrated and that wouldn't do. I'm sorry, Zenovia. I guess I'm Irina started to say before they were forced to stop on the bridge that wasn't far from the academy. In front of them was a single girl and one both girls knew well. She was wearing a Japanese schoolgirl uniform consisting of a gray blazer with blue plaid accents over a white dress shirt with a black tie, a black skirt, and black shoes with a large blue hat and long blue cape with pink flowers. It's been a long time, Irina. The new figure smiled. Irina's shock turned to a smile when she realized a person was their ally. Yes, it has LeFay. As much as I'd like to talk about old times, I have a battle to get to. Irina smiled. The person in front of them was LeFay Pendragon. Due to the Pendragon family's connection to Excalibur and the church, LeFay and Irina spent tons of time together and they were good friends. You don't want to do that, Irina, LeFay warned in an ominous tone. And why's that? Irina frowned since Issei said the same thing. I'm sure you're aware of this already, but Kokabiel doesn't need the Excalibur blades to kill everyone here. The fact he's waited so long to actually do something should tell you something very important. LeFay said calmly before leaving via magic circle. Hey Zenovia, what do you think she meant by that? Irina wondered. LeFay and Issei both said the same thing, and while nothing was actually said, it was clear that something was being hidden from her. I don't know, but I suppose we'll have to get to the school to find out. Zenovia replied. Right, Irina replied, and the two began moving. Issei may not like it, but she was going to figure out what was going on. Kuoh Academy, but the battle seemingly taking a pause until Freed was ready. Kokabiel was getting bored. How about I give us a little entertainment until Valper's little blade is ready? Kokabiel said smugly. Oh, Issei replied with intrigue before Kokabiel snapped his fingers. All of a sudden 2 magic circles appeared on the ground and flames poured out. What's going on? Rias asked nervously, but she had her answer when 2 large beasts appeared from within the flames. Each beast was the size of a medium-sized building with 3 heads, each containing red eyes and a mouth of flames. How will you deal with the hounds of hell? Kokabiel taunted. Rias was pleased because this was her moment to shine. Alright girls, let's do this. Yumi, Carlum and Kaneko, you take out 1 hound while Akeno and I take the other. Rias ordered. Oh, not going to have the red dragon fight, Kokabiel mused. No, Issei needs to save his strength, Rias replied confidently. Then again, she also wanted to prove herself to Issei in any way she could. Despite his seduction of Yumi, she still needed him on her side. Works for me. I'll guard Asia. Issei said calmly, acknowledging that. In truth, he didn't care what Rias did or about her desire to prove herself. This was simply him helping Yumi as he promised. As the hellhounds roared to life, Carloman and Yumi took on the one beast, while Rias, Akeno and Kaneko took on the second. As the battle unfolded, Issei had to admit that the Gremory group was much stronger than he expected, having rarely seen them fight. Yumi's sacred gear proved valuable by trapping the large beast in an array of swords which held him together, which allowed Carloman and her massive blade to slice the beast in 2. As for Rias, Akeno and Kaneko, the diminutive Kaneko proved herself to be a powerhouse in her own right. Akeno had powerful lightning magic which caused Kokabiel to smile when he noticed it. As for Rias, she truly was a powerhouse herself, and soon the second one had fallen. That was anticlimactic. Issei chuckled. Admittedly, he could have beaten either of the foes himself. Hell, his full power could beat both. Oh well. Kokabiel shrugged, but Valper looked at Yumi with intrigue. Oh my. It would seem that even though the other Excaliburs aren't here, my final subject is. Valper cackled. Yumi's rage returned and she stared at Valper. That's right, you bastard. I'm the one who escaped that day, the one who lived only for revenge against you and Excalibur. Yumi roared with rage. Issei was willing to let her stew for a bit since it would make things more interesting. Well, my dear, you'd be happy to know that your friend certainly didn't die in vain. Valper smirked. What are you talking about? Didn't you kill everybody because your experiments failed? Rias said in shock. The story that Yumi had always told her was that all of a sudden the men who were in charge of the experiment gathered the kids and killed them. Ah yes, but a funny thing happened afterwards. Valper chuckled as he thought back to the amazing moment when everything slowly made sense. What's that? Yumi growled with rage slowly forming. Valper smiled before reaching into his pocket pulling out a blue jewel. Turning towards Rias, Valper said, Lady Gremory, I assume you've heard of a holy factor, correct? Yes, I have. Holy factor is a human or fallen angel's ability to control holy magic. Every human has one, and training them allows humans to become exorcists. It's said that those with the highest holy factors typically become saints. Correct. After I disposed of everyone besides that girl of yours, I discovered that their holy factors were still intact despite dying. So I decided to combine them and see what happens. No, Rias gasped with her eyes widened as she realized what Valper was getting at. That's right, my dear. This jewel is concentrated holy factor, and through the jewel my success was at last achieved. When I went to the church with my findings they excommunicated me, but I've heard they used my research to power their fighters. Valper scowled. My friends, Yumi said in disbelief as she dropped to her knees. She couldn't believe that her friends were simply a jewel now. Everyone watching could see the pain in the knight's face, including Issei. However, all of that was put to the side when the light that was combining the Excaliburs faded, signifying the end of the fusion. Finally I get to fight. Though it looks like my dance partner isn't in the mood. Fried chuckled, aware that Issei wanted Yumi to fight him. No, she's not. I guess I'll be your opponent after all. Issei smiled. Show him what you can do, Fried. Valper cackled before handing the insane priest a new weapon before turning towards a downed Yumi. As for you, my dear, how about you say a few final words to your dear friends? Valper smiled before tossing the jewel in front of Yumi, who quickly grabbed the jewel. Meanwhile, Fried happily charged Issei with a wicked smile on his face. Die, Fried cackled, trying to slice Issei in two. That all you got, Fried? Issei smirked as he easily dodged attack after attack from the rogue priest. You bastards, stop dodging. Fried growled in annoyance. Now what fun is that? Issei smiled as he continuously dodged the attacks. To the watching group it was like Fried was being toyed with, and since Issei hadn't used balance breaker yet it was simply a matter of when he decided the fun was over, not if. Damn you. Keep still. Fried cursed, his attacks failing to hit the mark. It wasn't even like he was being countered either. My friends, a familiar female voice cried out, causing Fried to turn his focus back towards the blonde that Issei insisted would beat her earlier. I've got it, Fried said with a wicked smile on his face. This was his chance to really do damage and he wasn't going to turn it down. With a burst of speed he moved towards Yumi, who was so caught up in her grief that she didn't realize Fried was coming. Yumi Carlament called out, breaking her from her malice. Got you, Fried yelled out, prepared to stab and exposed Yumi right through her skull, but fortunately for her, Issei was able to get in the way. Good grief, Yumi, I thought you were stronger than that. Issei groaned as he took the attack in the stomach. It was an attack that would be incredibly painful and cripple the dragon even with his power. Issei. Yumi shrieked, having realized what her carelessness led to. That was boring, Fried groaned as he pulled out the blade, but in seconds he'd wish he hadn't. Luckily, that was a clone. The real Issei smirked from behind Fried as the clone vanished in a puff of smoke. Before the priest could spin and attack, Issei grabbed him by the scruff of his coat and tossed him like a ragdoll across the battlefield. Issei, Yumi said in shock before she was slapped on the right cheek by Issei. It was a rare show of true force by Issei, and it certainly served to wake her up. Are you an idiot, Yumi? You should have been mentally prepared for something like this the moment you knew Valper was here. Luckily I prepared a clone or you guys would be in deep shit. Issei cursed. Issei, Yumi said calmly before Issei pulled her up and placed his right hand where his slap mark once stood. Now come on, Yumi. You promised your friends that you would live for them, but now you have a new job. Fight for them. Fight for the memories of all the friends you lost that day. Use the power that Valper has given you to destroy his creation, just as I told you before. Issei said confidently before pressing his lips against Yumi's in a quick kiss. What the fuck is this crap? Fried groaned as he watched the kiss with disgust. As Issei pulled away, Yumi's gaze turned confident again. Got it, Yumi smiled, but that wasn't the only change. The blue jewel that somehow stayed in her other hand was glowing brightly and Issei quickly moved away. All of the sudden blue figures appeared in front of Yumi and they began speaking. "What's going on?" Rias said in shock. "My guess is the spirits of Yumi's former friends are calling out to her. Issei's call for revenge and power has spurned them all." Carloman suggested. Due to her time with Riser, she encountered far more holy beings and as a result could better guess the situation. "Everyone," Yumi said in shock. "You've lived well. Fight on, you can do it, this is bullshit." Fried groaned in annoyance, itching to attack something since he was treated so crudely. "Hold on," Fried, Valper instructed, and Valper watched as the figures spoke something very familiar to a few members of the group. "The holy song. You must be kidding," Valper said in disbelief. Everyone was stunned by the former song, but while most of the group was focusing on the song, Issei was focusing on the aura. "Well, how about that?" Issei chuckled, recognizing what was going on. "That's right, partner. Your little knight has become much stronger now," Drake said into his mind as the aura faded. "Valper Galil. For the longest time I lived for revenge and all that mattered was destroying Excalibur." Yumi spoke as her holy eraser appeared in her right hand. "Now I live for something else. Not to get my revenge but to avenge my friends." "Oh, just get on with it," Freak groaned. Yumi smiled as power began to roar inside her. She knew what was coming and she was ready. "Very well. I'm going to destroy you and destroy Excalibur with power from the life I once lived and the life I left behind." "Balance breaker." Yumi roared as the blade lit up once again with black and white power seemingly merging in two. "Now we're talking." Fried smiled and he watched with glee as the new blade appeared in Yumi's hands. It was a long silver blade about as tall as she was with two red lines on the right side of the tip and a black miniature blade in the middle. The intricate design at the end made for quite the appearance. "This is the sword of betrayer. A blade mixed with the holy power of the friends you left behind and the demonic power from my new life." Yumi smiled as she stood in front of a shocked Valper. "Finally we can get down to business." Fried chuckled as the two began to clash. "Well, this is interesting," Issei thought as the two warriors clashed together. As far as he knew, it should be impossible for holy and demonic powers to fuse. The fact it did was a terrifying thing. Partner, Drake said ominously. "I know," Issei groaned in annoyance as Irina and Zenovia approached the battlefield. The two wouldn't arrive for another few minutes, but there was another major problem. The aura used to fuse the swords was still active. Even as she cheered on her knight, Rias was again blissfully unaware of a major threat. One that Issei would deal with. Fried cackled as he tried to attack just for Yumi to counter it easily. "No, Fried. You die." Yumi smiled as she pushed back and started taking the fight to Fried directly. Unlike their first clash, Yumi was focused and ready, and unfortunately for the wicked swordsman his new power was no match for the girl in front of her. The combined Excalibur quickly broke and Fried was completely stunned. "No way," Fried said in disbelief, but a powerful burst of energy caused everyone to turn towards a smiling Issei. While Yumi was winning, I took the liberty of taking out the spell that Valper used to fuse the Excalibur. Issei smiled, causing a grin to appear on Kokabiel's face. "Well done, boy. Even if by some miracle you managed to defeat me, that spell would have destroyed this whole town in an hour." Kokabiel smirked, causing Rias to at last focus on the winged angel, or at least she would have if something else didn't distract everyone there. "That's impossible. Holy and demonic magic shouldn't interact. There's only one explanation for that would be." Valper started to say before Kokabiel nailed him with a holy spear. "Sorry, Valper, but you were getting a little too close." Kokabiel smiled, much to the confusion of everybody watching. "What do you mean too close?" Irina Hyoudou spoke, having just arrived on the battlefield with her Excalibur in tow and her partner next to her. "I'm glad you asked, my dear," Kokabiel said with a wicked smile that scared the hell out of Issei and caused the man to quickly go through scenarios that could explain Valper's discovery. What could he have gotten close to that would cause Kokabiel to? "It can't be," Issei thought to himself. A look of absolute horror appeared on the Issei's face as Kokabiel began to speak. "You see, the supernatural world has been hiding a terrible truth and I've decided to reveal it," Kokabiel started to say before Issei spoke up. "Don't do it, Kokabiel," Issei shouted in panic, realizing what Valper just figured out, and Kokabiel didn't know the truth. Now he knew what the truth was. Now he knew why Kokabiel didn't kill Rias. Now he knew why Kokabiel went along with this ruse. "Ah, you figured it out too, Harem Dragon Emperor." Kokabiel smiled. "Figured out what?" Irina wondered nervously. "Nothing, Irina. We figured out nothing." Issei panicked, trying to stop this. "I see. This one is important to you, isn't she?" Kokabiel smiled, aware that he really hit the jackpot. "Issei, what's he talking about? What's going on?" Irina wondered, noticing Issei's nervousness. "It's nothing, Irina. It's nothing," Issei said hastily. If he was right, Kokabiel was about to open an incredible can of worms. Kokabiel smiled because he had the red dragon right where he wanted him. Even he would admit that Issei's composure annoyed him. "I would think that the death of God is a little more than nothing, boy." Kokabiel smiled, causing a collective gasp to appear among the group. What? Irina said in disbelief. You're lying. Zenovia spoke up, her own expression paling. Not at all, girl. At the end of the Great War, the Devil Kings weren't the only ones who died. God died as well. Kokabiel roared, and the news shook everyone, but in particular the girls of the church. But how? God is dead, Asia Argento said in disbelief as she fell to the ground. What have we been fighting for? Zenovia gasped before doing the same, but Irina was the worst of all. No, this can't be. This can't be. Irina said in shock as her hands cradled her face in disbelief as she fell to the ground. The bond she shared with Issei had become so strong that she almost didn't want to leave when the time arrived for her to begin her training. Her father convinced her that by serving God she would be making Issei and the rest of the world safe, and she relented because of it. The knowledge that God was dead and her father, who almost surely would have known the truth, lied to her was too much for her. Irina's mind raced with the thought of what that lie cost her and how her life would be different. Issei was furious at Kokabiel, but calming his childhood friend's growing insanity was a priority. Issei quickly made 3 Dragona clones which were sent to Irina, Zenovia and Yumi, who was not as shaken as the others but still slightly shook. The clones quickly wrapped their girls in hugs and used a bit of their power to forcibly calm the 3 exorcists down. Asia was dealt with by Kaneko, and Issei was fine with that. Irina, listen to me carefully. I'm going to take you and Zenovia back to the house, and once we're there, you can cry all you want. Issei's clone said warmly as his power radiated around the girl. Issei's aura served to calm the stunned Irina down, and she looked up at the real Issei with her bloodshot eyes and asked, so what about the real you? Irina wondered, knowing the real Issei had to stay behind. Oh, believe me. He's going to deal with Kokabiel, but I'm sure he'll come see you afterwards. The clone smiled. Irina turned towards the real Issei. She could see the relief in his eyes, as well as smoldering rage. That was enough for her. Okay, Irina said calmly, and the 2 exorcists left the battlefield as quickly as they arrived. My, what a scene. Kokabiel smiled, knowing that his job was done. You won't be laughing for very long, Kokabiel. Issei smiled, his rage slowly building. Oh, Kokabiel replied with intrigue at the power that Issei was putting out. That's right, my friend. You're about to witness the smoldering power of a dragon. Issei said as his eyes lit up with power. Then bring it on, Red Dragon. Bring it on. Kokabiel smiled as his throne vanished at last and he fell to the battlefield. Issei's power exploded around him, which quickly brought Rias and Kendo out of their malice. Consider it done. Balance breaker, Issei roared as his power roared to life. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.